The golden age of steam. Railways. The social and commercial possibilities of the steam locomotive as a cheap source of motive power was soon realised in the early part of the last century, and several different designs were quickly produced. One of the first locomotives to be built was Timothy Hackworth's Locomotion, which was put into service on the Stockton and Darlington Railway. A replica is seen here running at the Shildon Parade of 1975. Note the rather spindly rods and vertical cylinders which were typical of these early machines. A rather lofty sans-pareil showing its paces. Perhaps the most famous locomotive of all, Rocket, pulling a somewhat austere passenger carriage. Lion, a locomotive that achieved fame in the film The Titfield Thunderbolt. All of these designs were built to the standard railway gauge of 4 feet 8.5 inches. However, the Great Western Railway in its infancy built its track to the broad gauge of 7 feet and 1/4 of an inch. One of its first locomotives was the Iron Duke, a replica of which is seen running in Hyde Park, London. The rather quaint-looking passenger carriages of this period were patterned on horse coaches in use at the time, and they were probably just as uncomfortable. The development of steam locomotives was quite rapid, and they began to take on a familiar shape. It's perhaps hard to believe that this locomotive was built less than 30 years after the birth of the Rocket. Wantage Tramway No. 5 is a 4-coupled well-tank locomotive. In 1890, the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway built this industrial tank locomotive, a class forever known by the rather unflattering term pugs. In the 1880s, the Great Northern Railway built their elegant Stirling singles. Note the huge 8-foot driving wheel which was thought necessary at that time for high-speed running. Another flyer of the same period was the London and North Western Railway's Hardwicke, one of the precedent class. This particular locomotive became renowned for its exploits over the Crewe to Carlisle line, achieving high speeds with heavy trains over this difficult route. Meanwhile, railway carriages were being developed, providing more comfort and safety for the traveller. Non-corridor stock, such as seen here, was common at the end of the last century. Eventually, corridor stock was built, depicted here in this rather mixed bag from the 1920s. Some of the major companies introduced observation coaches which provided an all-round view, and they proved to be popular with travellers. A rather more practical innovation was the provision of dining facilities on long-distance trains, as shown here with a rather merry bunch of passengers. As trains grew longer and heavier, more powerful locomotives were needed. The Great Western Railway at their Swindon works built a stationary test bed which enabled a controlled evaluation of the locomotive's consumption of coal and water, as well as their all-important hauling power. After completion, the locomotive is moved out of the shed on a traverser, a neat way of moving 76 tons. This particular locomotive is Chester Castle, one of the famous castle class designed and built at Swindon. Another fine GWR series was the King class, and here is King George V seen at Paddington, also filmed from the air en route to Didcot. In the 1930s, both the London, Midland and Scottish and London and North Eastern Railways built locomotives that were streamlined in an attempt to reduce wind drag at high speeds. From the LMS came the Coronation or Duchess class, and here is a rare clip of number 6227 Duchess of Devonshire leaving Carlisle on the southbound Coronation Scott, filmed in 1938. From the LNER came the A4 class designed by Sir Nigel Gresley. Number 4498 was named after its designer, and we see it here leaving Marylebone Station and then at different locations en route to Stratford-upon-Avon. Away from the hustle and bustle of main lines, there was still much of interest to be seen. Branch lines had a charm all of their own as they wove their way around the countryside. The Marlow to Bourne End branch in Buckinghamshire was typical of rural railways and still retained much of its GWR character. The engine, by the way, was one of that company's 1400 series. Signal boxes on branch lines were usually smaller and less complex than their mainline counterparts, although this particular box looks anything but easy to operate. Yet another feature of branch lines was the daily goods train shunting back and forth and dropping off or collecting the odd wagon or two. Although the bane of motorists, level crossings were a common sight on branch lines and were often operated by hand, as seen here. It would be hard to imagine a greater contrast to the idyllic way of life on branch lines than Clapham Junction, which with its 17 platforms and volume of traffic represents the busiest railway in the world. Almost all the locomotives shown here were built by the Southern Railway and are very much on home territory. One of the many trains that passed through Clapham Junction was the Channel Islands boat train, which ran from Waterloo to Weymouth. In Weymouth Harbour, the train had to weave its way around the quayside, with often very little clearance on either side of the train. In the 1950s, British Rail started to introduce diesel-electric locomotives on both passenger and freight trains. With ever-increasing numbers being introduced, it became obvious that the writing was on the wall for steam. This driver, oiling a Class 5 locomotive, will soon be at the controls of a diesel engine, a radical change for him. The fireman's skill and muscle power will become a thing of the past. In the 60s, redundant steam locomotives were laid up in their hundreds at locomotive power depots, such as this rather sorry row of Britannias, Class 9s and Ivat 4MTs. The same shed had at least Jubilee Class Alberta and Britannia Class John of Gaunt in steam. Most of them ended up in scrap yards such as this, where the welder's torch showed no mercy. Could we be looking at tomorrow's cars, cookers and razor blades? Fortunately, due to the foresight and dedication of many people and societies, an ever-increasing number were saved for preservation. One of those saved was the LMS Duchess of Sutherland, which spent most of its life on express passenger trains between London, Glasgow and Perth. Another one to be preserved was Jubilee Class Bahamas, seen here at Hunslet Shed, Leeds in 1967 and looking immaculate. Jumping forward 22 years to 1989, we see Bahamas on a mainline special at Garsdale en route from Leeds to Carlisle. Other famous locomotives to join the preservation ranks included Green King, Sir Nigel Gresley, Flying Scotsman and Sir Lamiel, to name but a few. One of the most popular and appealing is Flying Scotsman, seen here in fine form, first at Marylebone and then at Denham on the High Wycombe line. A preserved member of the Southern Railway Merchant Navy class is Clan Line, one of a series of quite advanced designs by O.V. Bulleid. Originally built with an enclosed casing, they were all later defrocked. The loco is seen here leaving Marylebone at the head of a Shakespeare Express. In 1934, the LMS introduced their Series 5 mixed traffic locomotives, known to railwaymen and enthusiasts alike as Black Fives. In service, they turned out to be the most versatile class of locomotive that company had ever built. They lasted right through to the end of steam on British rail. In 1966, Black Fives were still operating on trains between London and Nottingham. We take a short trip on board, hauled by a Black 5 between Marylebone and Harrow-on-the-Hill. The two shown here are on the last official steam train to be run by British Rail on the 11th of August 1968. A long way from London, a preserved Black 5 leads a steam special out of Appleby and on its way to Leeds. One of the most famous of all steam locomotives is the LNER A4 Mallard, and rightly so, as it's the proud holder of the world's speed record for a steam locomotive, 126 mph, achieved in 1938, although this scene is a far cry from Mallard's heady days on the East Coast Main Line. Mallard puts up a creditable performance on the Settle and Carlisle line, seen here passing the backdrop of Mallerstang Common and eventually reaching the summit at Ays Gill. A source of much pleasure and perhaps education to many people are Britain's preserved railways. And in the following extracts we pay tribute to the multitude of volunteers and societies who've helped to preserve part of our national heritage. The very well-known Bluebell Railway in Sussex. Amongst one of the first preservation schemes in the country, it's been very successful in recreating the atmosphere of a southern railway junction here at Horsted Canes. This station was once quite a busy place with connections to East Grinstead and Lewes, and there was an electrified link to Haywards Heath on the main Brighton line. Loco number 1618 is one of the 4 preserved survivors of Maunsell's U-class. It was built in 1928 and as number 1618 was put to work in the Guildford area. Eventually it was sent for scrap, like so many other locomotives, to Barry Island near Cardiff. The Class 4 is on duty today and takes its turn to haul heavy trains up the incline to the south of the station. As there are no turntables on the Bluebell, engines have to run backwards on their return working. Today it's hauling a fine collection of Southern Railway coaches, all restored in the large workshops here at Horsted Canes. A BR loco, number 75027, was built in 1954 at Swindon Works. A total of 80 were built, and this one came to the Bluebell in 1969. The Festiniog Railway. A busy weekend for this popular narrow gauge railway in North Wales. They're celebrating 150 years of service. Boston Lodge Works are open to visitors and a great many locomotives are in steam and running around. Most of them look very odd and some of them run on oil instead of coal. Prince is one of the oldest locos here still in service. It will soon be taking its turn to haul the many extra trains laid on for this special weekend. On loan from the Leighton Buzzard narrow gauge railway is the De Winton Challoner. Also here with it is Hunslet Britomart. Originally, trains ran by gravity down the line from the quarries carrying slate. So today a replica train has been made up and is giving demonstration runs. But first it's steam hauled up the line and afterwards will return to Minforth station by gravity, but with railway staff to control it. Today the line is a great tourist attraction and packed trains travel up the line to Blaenau Festiniog. The heavy trains all demand double heading for the large number of passengers being carried on this special weekend. Here at Blaenau Festiniog, passengers can change onto a local BR diesel train. This train is travelling over a recently reopened section of the railway. It's on its way to Northiam station, which has been restored to its original rural condition, apart from longer platforms which are needed for the greatly increased traffic now running on the line. Today the section is open to the general public for the first time, and this is the first train to enter the station. Regular services last ran to Northiam in 1954, when the whole line was closed down by British Railways. Preservationists have struggled since 1961 to restore the line, and they succeeded in reopening 4 miles of track from Tenterden to Wittersham Road. Developing this section of the line has made the Kent and East Sussex Railway into the longest standard gauge preserved line in the south east. A typical locomotive of the line, the Terrier, was used on the railway for many years, even in BR days. The very important job of watering up has to take place here. The locos soon run round their train and couple up for the return journey. There's a speed restriction on this bridge, so trains approach it with care. An untypical loco here today, the American-built USA tank is also on duty. These locos were called switchers or shunters in this country. 2 of them arrived on the line in 1968. One of the USA locos has been in service on and off since it arrived on the line, but the other one was dismantled and lay in bits for many years. Plans are in hand to rebuild it again, as its haulage power is now needed more than ever. The railway ran an intensive service and 3 trains were in action all day. The Flockton Flyer was the starring engine in a television serial some years ago. Today, the Flockton Flyer is a pannier preparing for the first train of the day, early in the summer season at Minehead on the West Somerset Railway. The very open platform at Minehead offers no shelter when a sudden downpour greets the loco joining its train for the day. There's a huge Butlins holiday camp next to the railway. One would expect many more passengers to take a ride on the Flockton Flyer on a dull day such as this one. After a pleasant run beside the sea, the pannier tank soon arrives at Blue Anchor. At this time, the railway had to use a diesel train on part of the line, so passengers would change over to it at Blue Anchor station. The signalman also has to work the level crossing gates. The railway is negotiating to run steam trains all the way to Taunton one day. At Hurston Halt, a double-headed train arrives. The leading engine has just been completely overhauled and they're running it in for a while. The Swanage Railway don't own many locos and they have to borrow them from other lines. The train is waiting here for another one to pass. It comes in hauled by a newly borrowed XGWR loco. At Harmon's Cross, the present end of the line, there's a steep gradient on the approach to the platforms. It's Friends of Thomas Day on the railway, hence the funny faces on the locomotives. Many railways have theme days as they help to generate more passengers. But first, the freight train on the other track must move so that the passenger train engine can run round. The diesel shunter is one of the familiar 08 class. The railway is laying track beyond Harmon's Cross towards Corfe. Several bridges have had to be completely rebuilt, and the company hope to be running trains right through to Corfe in 1991. Meanwhile, the newly acquired engine approaches Hurston Halt. It's one of the ex-Great Western class 56XX062s, kindly loaned by the Telford Horsey Steam Trust. It arrived on the line in March 1990. It immediately proved to be a useful and capable engine on the heavier trains now running on the line. At least it keeps the Great Western fans happy. Ropley Shed on the Watercress line. Although specialising in ex-London and South Western engines, they have quite a variety of others here too. At Alton, steam trains meet passengers who've travelled down from London by electric train. The first train out today is hauled by Bodmin, a rebuilt West Country class locomotive. It arrived from Barry one day, just a pile of rust, and after many years of restoration, it's one of the railway's finest engines. At Alresford, an XBR locomotive waits for an incoming train to pass and clear the line before it sets off. On this bright November day, the first of the Santa specials are running. To cope with the huge numbers of children wanting to see Santa Claus in a steam train, they've had to divide the line into two sections so that they can have two Father Christmases on duty, hoping that none of the children take two rides. Just outside Alton station, trains have to tackle a heavy gradient. It's preserved railways like these that keep the vintage trains and traditional steam engines going, giving pleasure to many people and reviving memories of local steam train journeys that were part of everyone's lives when going to school and then to work.